Hello. Servus.
Marhaba.
Hola. Hello.
I'm inspired that there's so many people working to accomplish the same goal of creating a connected future. By having students lead clubs on campus directly supported by Google developers, that's the best way to reach out to students.
It's really inspirational always to hear about members of the community who echo your values and echo your beliefs.
I've been listening more than I've been speaking, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I'm just getting all these ideas.
Google, it needs to reach a wider audience and be more relatable as a company, and I think Google is one of the brands that is very good at doing that.
Hi everyone, we are pretty excited. Last Tuesday we had our Flutter Engage event, and there was a lot of fun stuff that happened there, a lot of cool announcements, and there is today's event. So if you can have my slides up now, is going to talk about a few cool things which I'm going to go over. So first, let's just back and just talk like from the start. Flutter started all the way in about 2016. By the way, this is the milestones from the GitHub page. Started in 2016, and finally in 2018, it was officially released. And the potential for cross-platform development and for having beautiful UI with ease of use and all the core functionalities of Flutter was introduced. The potential was introduced. And since then, Flutter has taken off. So there have been a lot of activity to the open source GitHub page, and several different versions have come in. And that led us to 2019, when we had this incredible event, a live event, where we saw this. And I'm just showing some examples of a presentation from Luigi and Guido, who showed us how to use Rive in Flutter, where he demonstrated this cool Gus, the geese, you can say. And another presentation in 2019 in the Flutter Interact event, where Grant Skinner, who also released Flutter Folio, if you're familiar with that. In 2019, they had released these Flutter vignettes that showcased what is possible with Flutter. Amazing UI, great performance, ease of use, and everything went well. All of us love Flutter. In 2018, the potential was introduced, what Flutter is. People started using it, loved it, and Flutter advanced. And then there was one big question, is when will Flutter Web come into the stable channel? And when Flutter announced last Tuesday's event, we all were expecting that there could be some great news about this. Flutter Web could come into stable. We weren't sure, but there was a lot of speculation about this. And finally, the event came around last Tuesday. Very exciting, great announcements that came out from that event. And there were a lot of announcements that blew our minds. But however great that event was last Tuesday, let me show you an image of the first Flutter event when Flutter was announced. This was last Tuesday, and this was in 2018 when Flutter was first announced. Do you see any differences in these two events? Well, last Tuesday's event was online, whereas the event from 2018 was in person. There was this touch of live interactivity that was missing from last Tuesday's event. So to bridge this gap, to have this live interaction with some folks from the Flutter team, some great guests, some great Flutter experts, we have this event, the Flutter Engage Extended, the North America version, where we have some experts who are going to talk about the announcements that happened last Tuesday, and just talk more about what's happened so far. So, have you missed last Tuesday's event? Well, you should absolutely check it out. A lot of great announcements, and if you have missed it, not a problem. We have a GDE, a Flutter expert, a Google developer expert for Flutter, Faisal, who's going to give you a quick recap of what happened last Tuesday. So if we can have Faisal on stage.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Rohan.
Hi.
That's a great intro. Super good.
Thanks.
Cool. So I'm going to be talking about Flutter, a recap for Flutter Engage. You know, not a lot of us have time to watch like the whole 2-hour event. So I'm going to go through the entire event in 40 minutes or less, and I'm going to talk about the highlights. And so one of the top things that came out of this event is the Dash generator. So if you haven't already generated your Dash, go to flutter.dev/dash, and you'll be able to start generating your own custom Dash emojis. But with that aside, let's talk about Flutter Engage. There was two big things that was, announced at Flutter Engage. There's technology and partnerships. So I'm going to be talking about technology first, and then I'm going to talk about partnerships. The partnerships are interesting because that's what you kind of get validation on Flutter becoming more mainstream. There's always this idea about, you know, is Flutter mainstream? Should I use it? And what the Google team announced last week, it truly shows that Flutter is ready for prime time. We're at Flutter 2.0 now, which is an announcement that was made that we'll talk about. But not only are we at 2.0, we have big companies investing a lot of money into Flutter. And this just means that Flutter has a very bright future ahead of us. So let's talk about what they first announced. The first thing that we got was Flutter 2. And they called it a free upgrade. Now, what do they mean by free upgrade? You know, Flutter's already free. It's already open source. What does that even mean? Well, the word free is being used in a very interesting way here. If you already have a Flutter app that you've built, right? You know, 2 weeks ago, say you went out and you used a stable branch, Flutter 1.2, I think, or 1.26, and you built a mobile app, right? You built a calculator, for example. All you have to do to make this calculator now run on Windows, Mac, Linux, and web is you just have to upgrade to Flutter 2. For free, you're going to get access to 4 platforms. This is unreal, right? If you think about how much code that you would have to write to support 4 platforms, how many languages you would have to learn. Before Flutter, you would have to know, perhaps C#, perhaps Objective-C, Swift, perhaps some C++, and then on top of that, for web, you need to know JavaScript and all the tooling that comes with it. With Flutter, you just need to write once, and it truly runs your code everywhere. In a lot of studies that the Flutter team did, and even in my own research and experience, you typically get to share around 95% of your code, which is really good, right? And you might be wondering, well, what about the other 5%? What is that 5%? And that typically is around push notifications or around specific hardware compatibility stuff, right? If you're using, for example, the contact book on your phone, then you're not going to find the contact book on your computer or even web. And so you need to write some code around that. So I'm going to give you an example, actually, of a cool Mac app. I'm just going to share my screen here to the Mac app. One second, everyone. All right, share screen. Application window. All right, so this, believe it or not, is a Mac app. And what I can do with this, it's called Flutter Folio. Rohan had just talked about it. But what I can do with this is I can go, all right, view folio, and it loads up. Let me increase the size here. All right. It loads up, and I'm able to completely interact with this app, right? Now, to build an app like this, if you don't know a desktop language, will take a lot of time, or you're using something like Electron with JavaScript and stuff. But this is actually native Mac OS running. Now, what do I mean by native? The way Flutter works, the way Flutter is able to achieve all these cool tricks is by building their own rendering engine. So technically what's happening is Mac, Windows, Linux, Web, Android, iOS, all 6 of these platforms, the Flutter team has gone ahead and wrote a rendering engine for each one of these platforms. It's like Unity if you play games, right? Game developers aren't really building a game for Android and iOS. They're typically building it for Unity, and the Unity team has gone ahead and built rendering engines for these platforms. So the Flutter team took that same philosophy, but just for apps. And so if you see here, this is a Mac app. It installs like a Mac app. If I go into my applications directory, there's a full Flutter folio.app. Now, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to share my entire desktop here. So give me 1 second. And look what I'm going to do now. So stop share. I'm going to run the same app on the web. And I haven't changed any code. You're just going to have to trust me on that. So I'm in the repo here, Flutter Folio. I'm going to increase my font size here. Okay, cool. That's good enough. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Flutter devices just to see what devices are connected. I'm already running Flutter 2.0. So it says I'm connected to Chrome. So I'm going to go Flutter run d Chrome. And what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and take all that Flutter code, and it's going to convert all that Dart, which is a language you use write Flutter apps in, to JavaScript. This is very interesting. You know, the Dart team has worked for the past 6-7 years on this crazy good compiler that actually takes Dart code and compiles it to JavaScript. And so now it's, why isn't this running? Demo fail, everyone, demo fail. Oh no, okay, it just took some time. Ooh, shoot. A second or two to start up, and I can see what's going on here. All right, come on, demo, don't fail me now. Give it a second. Come on, come on. This was working a minute ago before the demo. This is crazy. All right, I'm gonna give it 1 more second. If not, I'm just gonna move on. Okay, there we go. Phew. So here, I've loaded it. Now, because I'm debugging, it's connected to a debugging Firebase, which is why I'm logging in with different credentials. But if I log in here, this is the exact same app that I was just using, right? And so what I can do now is I can browse. Let's look at these photos that someone uploaded. Great. You know, I can view the folio, and now it's the exact same app. It's the exact same code base, right? So this is the power of Flutter 2.0. You're getting Mac, Windows, Linux, Android, iOS for free, and web, right? You're just writing code once. So let's go back to my slides and let's talk about what else the Google team announced. Share screen, application. All right. So that's what they mean by free upgrade. We're only on the first slide here. There's so much cool stuff they announced, guys. All right, so let me get my notes back here because there's so many things I got to keep my notes in mind. Okay, so like I said, 95% of the code you just get for free, right? Which is amazing. So the next thing they announced was Dart upgrades. Now I'm not going to get into the technical details of the Dart upgrades, but what they are basically, in a very short, easy way, your code, most languages have this idea of null, right? I'm sure everyone, if you ever develop something, you run into a null point error. And so that causes a lot of issues as you're developing code. So the Dart team, which is Dart, again, is the language that Flutter is built on, has spent, again, many years, almost I think 2 or 3, figuring out how to get rid of, how to make Dart a lot more safer, and that's called null safety. And what null safety does is, if you upgrade your code enough to Dart 2.0, which I'll show you how simple it is to upgrade, the compiler and the framework will actually be smart enough to alert you that, hey, you've done something wrong in your code and there's going to be a null pointer in your future. So you should rewrite this in a different way. And this just allows for faster programs because now the compiler knows that there's no way that you can introduce a null in your code base. And so the compiler can do even more optimizations, which makes your code faster and even makes your code safer. So that's Dart upgrades. We won't spend too much time on it, but if you're thinking about upgrading your code, keep listening. I'll tell you guys about how to do that. Cool. Flutter Web. I'm not going to give another demo on Flutter Web. I kind of mix my demos. So one thing I do want to talk about, though, is that Flutter Web is stable. And what that means is you can confidently deploy applications to production with Flutter Web. Now, is it intended for all use cases? Probably not. In my opinion, Flutter Web is intended for very powerful, robust applications that you're building. I wouldn't build like a homepage that's just like a contact app. That just says, hello, press this button, contact me in Flutter. There's really no point. But if you're building like Google Ads, for example, a very robust, responsive application, Flutter is great for that because you're getting all that power, and it's worth the added overhead of a Flutter framework. So keep that in mind as you're developing Flutter applications. Next, DevTool upgrades. There's been a lot of good upgrades to DevTools, and this is what I was talking about. Flutter has now introduced something called Flutter Fix. And I'm not going to share my screen to show a demo for this, but if you just go into your command line, and if you just type in Flutter Fix, what it will do is it will actually scan your entire code base, and it will find all the errors. For example, if you're upgrading from Flutter 1.22 to Flutter 2, there's a lot of things that are now deprecated or obsolete, and you might want to go through your entire code and fix it. Well, Flutter Fix will automatically do that for you in a very safe way. The other thing you can do is you can actually convert your entire code base to be null safe, which means, what we just talked about, you won't introduce null errors into your code base. And so you just go again, you go to Dart DevTools and you say, upgrade my code to be null safe, and it will scan your entire code and actually apply all the upgrades for you. You obviously have to click confirm. It just won't rewrite your code. So make a backup, use Git, commit your code into Git, and then run a null safety upgrade. And almost 95% of cases that I've seen, it works flawlessly. The only times that you will run into issues is if you're using code that that you borrowed from somewhere else. Perhaps you fork an open source repository and it's not written really well, or you just wrote bad code because you were rushing. Everyone does it. It might cause some issues, so you might have to manually fix some stuff. But aside from that, it works amazing. All right, and then the last of the technical upgrades is from Firebase and Google Ads. Firebase is really key to mobile development. It's become more key in the past 3-4 years. And so what Google did was they actually went back and they re-looked at the Firebase library, and they said, okay, how can we make this library better, right? Initially, it wasn't the focus back, 2 years ago when Flutter just came out, but over time, Flutter's become mature, Firebase has become mature. And so the Google team rewrote huge chunks of the the Firebase framework, and now it's very performant, it's null safe, you're gonna get less errors, and it works really, really well. So definitely upgrade your entire applications, libraries, all your Firebase libraries to the latest version. And then one special thing that Google introduced is a Google Ads native SDK. We all, Google obviously going to push ads, but this is actually a very good thing because a lot of times what developers are doing with Google Ads in their Flutter apps was putting a banner at the top that didn't really talk to their Flutter app because Google Ads did not have native support for Flutter. And what that means is you weren't able to take an ad or a banner and actually customize it into your application so it looks beautiful, right? Those ugly banners at the top, no one likes them, but they like ads that are context aware inside your application. You're scrolling your list view, you see an ad, it's a pleasing experience, and you actually have a higher click-through rate. And so Google Ads now has an SDK that lets you do that. And they showed a demo at the conference where a very popular Latin American music app has gotten amazing results by using this. And honestly, it looks beautiful. It's not an ugly ad. It's a very nicely placed ad, and it just increases user, users are more likely to click on it. You make more money, and users are able to find more relevant content because it's native to your app. The other very interesting thing, and we're going to talk about partnerships. This is the last thing we're going to do before I'm done here, is that Google wanted to show that they're spending a lot of times, they're spending a lot of effort in making sure that Flutter is not just this hobbyist project, right? Flutter is something that they're very much working on, and the community is very much involved in. And the best, Google can say, we got Google Ads, Google Pay, which I'm talking about right now, but those are just Google products, right? Of course, Google's going to use Google products. Like in the case of Google Pay, they were able to rewrite their entire Android and iOS application. The project manager says that they took the Android and iOS team, they consolidated them to become a Flutter team, and they were able to build the application faster with less code and reduce tech debt by like this crazy percentage. But that's just Google, right? What about Microsoft? Now, Google and Microsoft working together sounds crazy, but Microsoft actually came out with an Android phone called Duo. It's this cool two-screen phone, and it uses Android, and it uses special custom SDKs, a modification of Android also, to get applications working on two screens seamlessly. Microsoft said, well, what other framework do we feel that is very important for us to support dual screen? Because not only Microsoft doing dual screen, Samsung, Toshiba, all these guys who are building smartphones are doing dual screens now. And so Microsoft actually contributed to the Flutter SDK. This is how much other third parties believe in Flutter now. They contributed to the SDK, and they added support for dual screen devices. So if you were to use Flutter and you use this SDK, the dual screen SDK, your application will work like any other dual screen app on Microsoft Duo, I guess the Samsung Galaxy Fold, and all those crazy, very expensive, but very interesting devices. The other really, really cool thing that came out, which I think is a big testament to the power of Flutter, is Ubuntu said that moving forward, all Ubuntu applications, or the company's called Canonical or something, but let's just say Ubuntu, all Ubuntu applications are now going to be built in Flutter. This is very cool. They wrote a big blog post about this, but one of the key things they said was it's helping them be more productive. And as Rohan talked about earlier, many years ago when Flutter was announced, I was a Dart GD, and I was giving talks on Dart. And one of the common recurring things I heard from companies using Dart is that it makes them productive. And so Dart just being this very nicely designed language helps developers be more productive, including developers at Ubuntu, so much so that they said, wow, Dart is great. What can we do with Dart? Well, it turns out we can build now Linux applications using Flutter. And so Ubuntu is actually adopting Flutter as they're becoming a Flutter first company, I guess, where any application that they build moving forward will be built in Flutter. That's really, really cool. And then obviously, if you've been paying attention to the stock market in the past like 6 months, electric cars are like the biggest thing. So Toyota, in all their new electric cars that they're coming out with, they're building Flutter front and center. If you're gonna buy a new electric Toyota in the next year or so, and you sit inside and you turn on the entire entertainment system, that entire UI is going to be built in Flutter. Now, why does that matter to you? Other than the fact that these big companies are using Flutter, here's why that's really cool. It's because if you build a Flutter app right now, your application will run on Mac, Windows, Linux, Android, iOS, and then it will run on all these Surface Duo phones, all these dual screen phones. It'll run on Ubuntu, all Ubuntu applications. It'll run just like any other Ubuntu app, and then it'll run on Toyota cars, right? And who knows? Tomorrow I don't know, Ford might come out with a partnership. Ford does have a partnership with Google, actually. I don't know what they're doing regarding Flutter. But if Toyota's stuff is a big success and they open up the SDK to build applications for a car, all you have to do is just go, okay, compile now to a Toyota, and your application just runs. So all these things, keeping all these things in mind, I think what's great and what the future of Flutter is that it's going to continue to grow at a very fast pace, as we've seen in the past 2 years. But it's also going to get very mature, that more and more companies jump on and go, wow, this is great. We're able to be more productive. And all companies care about, to be honest, companies don't care about the technology. They care about productivity. And if you can get a great technology and improve developer productivity, it's a match made in heaven. And so companies are seeing this and they're going, wow, Flutter is that perfect holy grail that we want, and it's working out really well for them. So with that, I urge everyone to go download Flutter 2.0. If you already have Flutter, it's just Flutter upgrade. If you don't have Flutter, just go to the website flutter.dev, and then everything will just start working. You can write applications in VS Code. You can write it in IntelliJ. You can even write it in Vim. It doesn't matter. You can build applications however you want and deploy them wherever you want now. So I'll let Rohan take it back. They're probably just like scrambling behind the scenes. We love these great online things. I remember when I was at a talk, when I was doing online stuff, it was funny because I think developers, the organizer had left, and I was just talking mindlessly to the audience for 20 minutes. All right. Well, Randal's here, so I'll let Randal take over.
I'll be the next guy in line. It sort of works. So at this point, I believe we are heading into a discussion, a panel discussion in a moment or two. So we're looking for questions. We can take some questions. I guess just been whispered in my ear that we have questions we could do. Except I'm not sure who's actually looking at the list. Oh, I should be looking at the list. That's what it is. So there were some questions that were gathered up by Madhusha, who has been watching the post-meeting fallout of this thing. First off, I want to say I'm really excited. I've been playing with the non-null by default version of Dart for quite a while now in the beta channel, and it's really nice. I'm migrating now, and I'm starting all my new projects with the 2.12 Dart, and it's not as hard as it looks. It does have some trickiness though. Let me go. Now I have to actually read the questions that came to me in the list. And hopefully we'll get a couple more people on pretty quick.
Well, there's a question
Yes?
on the screen already.
Oh, right there. How about that? Yes, that's the question I pointed out. So I probably should know this. Okay. So one of the things that I've seen actually numerous times in the 6 or 7 social channels that I follow is this very question, which is, and Dalton Light, something like that, is asking this from our current live YouTube chat. So you too can ask your questions. Is the purpose of null safety to move errors regarding null to compile time instead of runtime, or did I interpret that incorrectly? No, I'd say you got it pretty well spot on. So we've had null safety for years. Ever since having nulls and stuff. We've had null safety for years, but it was always being done at runtime. And the penalty of that, as I understand it, is that for pretty much every operation then, it had to go, is this null? And it had to generate code in x86 and also in JavaScript and everything to say, is this null before I actually do it? What the non-null by default NNBD, you might see this occasionally, version of Dart, which is now released as 2.12, what that does is it does a flow analysis of your code and allows you to, by default, mark that these variables will never hold null, with the exceptions that you also can mark up. I'm actually answering the question too. I guess I can let you answer this, but you've just been talking for a second, so I'll finish this answer and we'll go on to something else. Okay. So what happens is it does a flow analysis, figures out all the different ways to get to a particular code line, almost all the ways, I should say, slight disclaimers all the way through this. but if it can provably show that this variable can no longer be null, first off, it's helping your code development time, because you don't have to then go, is this null, then do this, else do that. It's just null. It's just guaranteed to be not null. And then it can also, in the generation of code from your Dart code in whatever target you've got, JavaScript or native, it can skip that check. That makes the code faster, that makes the code smaller. It's just a win-win-win all the way through. Did I just say 3 wins? I hate that when I do that. Okay, it's a win-win all the way through. And it's a good thing. Now, there's tools provided called Dart Migrate that allow you to essentially run the same analysis and see if what actually would violate that sort of pathway to the variables and things you're using, and allows you to use the extra markup that's been introduced in 2.12, the question mark, the exclamation mark, the late keyword, and so on, to be able to actually still have your code run. But you'll have to, once you do that, you can't go back. So Dart 2.12, it's a great step forward, but it's basically a one-way door. And there are a lot of other conditions for that too that have been discussed a little bit at the, we had the video during Engage showing Dart Migrate actually being using, and it's a very slick tool. It's very, very smart, and it's well designed. So, all right. Is there another question out there? Let's see here. Oh yeah. Ask more questions, please. Oh, you want to take this one? Somebody want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this. It's
Thanks.
Google's objective to have, the question is Google's objective to have Dart Flutter be in the same position that Java is currently, but expand Flutter beyond apps and web development? Example, Toyota. Now, I don't speak for Google, but it sure does seem like that the direction that Google is headed in is to have Flutter be on all screens. Just like one de facto language, the de facto platform that runs absolutely everywhere. And like I said in my presentation, with 95% of code will be the same, and then you can modify it per platform. So I think that is the vision. I mean, all signs point to that. I think what's really nice about that is it'll just help developers be more productive and focus on the business case rather than constantly learning a new technology and be able to just recreate the wheel like 5 times for 5 different platforms.
So one of the things, actually, we had a series that taught Flutter on this YouTube channel. And one of the things that we introduced with is we described Flutter as not a tool to build for a specific operating system or for a specific platform, but rather to build for the screen. And people that resonated with that idea is we are building for wherever there are pixels. And Chris and many people on the Flutter team say wherever they see pixels moving, they want Flutter to run there. And I think that's what's the main idea and the main inspiration behind Flutter.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not quite as universal as Qt is, but maybe it'll take that over someday.
One other thing, this isn't a new idea, right? No. Like Randal just said, Qt's been around back in the day. If you're old enough, you saw Flash. But what Flutter did was it learned from the mistakes for all these platforms, right? All these platforms were a product of their time. As Flutter is, and maybe in 2060 there's going to be something else. But for now, Flutter has learned from all the mistakes that all these other platforms did and all the good things they did. And one of the pro things about Flutter is that it's open source. So you have this huge community of people constantly contributing and fixing stuff. Versus something like Flash, which I still think was a great technology, but it wasn't open source, and that caused a lot of security issues, and it just couldn't move that fast.
Yeah. We have another question. So this is Lens Paul asking from the chat channel here. Any advice on best practices for different screen size, such as flexible widgets, media queries, etc.? Anyone want to take that?
Rohan, do you want to take that?
Oh, yes. And now to complete the circle, Randal, do you want to take that? It's a
Well, I
question that
can.
has to- Oh no! If you can, yeah, please have the question on the screen. Yes.
Yeah, please. Question back on the screen. Vent. There we go.
Oh, yes. So one of the cool things with Flutter Web coming in stable, and now many people using Flutter Web as their as now I would assume their primary platform for web development. One of the things that occurs is the much wider screens. So that is one thing that I found that we like some of our apps that we did for our series that taught Flutter, we just did it for the phones. And so one of the things to migrate it for the web, while the code stays the same, is just adapting to this larger screen size. That's one change that was quite prominent.
Yeah, and we do also have technologies that, as you mentioned, a couple of them. Well, you being the person asking the question, not you. Is we do have ways of probing what we're on, what we're paying attention to, screen size in particular. My favorite widget for that, which adds a tiny bit of extra expense, is called Layout Builder. And the great thing about Layout Builder is you get then an immediate size, not of your whole device, but actually the part of your screen that is available to you after you have the stuff at the top and the stuff at the bottom removed, like if you have a permanent menu bar or something down below, or some side markers of some kind. That's all subtracted already. So all you've got is that big square blob, and whichever way it's facing, the big square blob that's left over for you to put the rest of your widgets, and you can use the size to decide how to do the layout. Do you want to have 2 columns? Do you want it all in one column a long way or something? You get to make those decisions right there. And there have been some wonderful packages in the pub that have built on top of that notion and really done some remarkable work with it in terms of getting real cool reflexive layouts that are sensitive to what device you're on. And now we have the foldables. That's going to be even more interesting, trying to figure out, do I want this thing to be on 2 pages or I want it to be on 1 page? It's going to be fun. And Joseph Squilaro, I'll just mangle that last name there, something like that. Squilaro? It could be if it's Spanish. Okay. What risk does the Flutter fix CLI command carry, if any, to an existing 1.22 production project? I'm guessing that's Flutter 122 because we don't have 122 in Dart yet. So, nor do we? No, it's 2.12. Yeah, so it must be Flutter 122. Can I confidently perform it without it breaking packages or other vital functions? Well, fix is different from migrate. So let's make that clear first. Mm-hmm. So fix merely watches the output of your analyzer, and Google has figured out replace this with that to fix this particular analyzer complaint. That's all fix does. But I bet your question, which shouldn't generate any problems for anything, because it's basically fixing the analyzer stuff that you have output, and you would have done pretty much the same change. I think you might be thinking of the Flutter the Dart migrate, which moves it to the new Dart. Yes, it can break things. Please make sure you commit. Please make sure you have tests. This is really important. If you don't have tests yet, get some tests first so you can run that on your migration and make sure you didn't break anything that way. Other advice from people here?
Well, you just mentioned that to always have tests. I also always have it now, and I kind of don't like it. It's a joke of a college test.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not that kind of test. I'm talking about Dart tests, Flutter tests. Yes. And those are getting better too. So go ahead, Faisal.
Yeah. There's actually a good question. It hasn't been picked up, but it talks about, do you believe that more opportunities will open up for internships and jobs working with Flutter? There we go. Now that Flutter 2 has come out. I know there's a lot of students. That's why I chose that specific question. I would say yes. I would say you have to follow the life cycle for these technologies. When React Native first came out, I'm sure I say React Native because there's so many jobs for React and React Native. When React Native and React hit the scene, a year later, 6 months later, you weren't finding tons of jobs for it. It takes time for new startups to emerge, new companies to go through this life cycle to say, wow, we've analyzed React Native, it's time to rebuild our app. And so it's the same type of pattern you're seeing now with Flutter, where companies are looking at Flutter and, just qualitatively in my own network, 2 years ago, I would have never had like CTOs of companies reach out to me and say, hey, Faisal, we're thinking about porting your application to Flutter. Can you help us out? And now I get that on a weekly basis. And so we're starting to see a shift. And as we're in 2021 now. As 2021 now progresses more, and 2022 comes, you'll see this critical point where more and more startups, more and more companies looking at the successes of their peers go, okay, wow, Flutter's worked out really well for them. We're going to jump ship and we're going to do Flutter as well. So it's definitely something that you should learn. One of the great things about Flutter, honestly, is that it is not too difficult to learn. There are a lot more difficult frameworks out there. That a lot of people are hyping up. So I would say as a beginner language, Flutter is great. Dart and Flutter are great. And then the concepts you learn from Dart and Flutter, it's not like you can't apply it anywhere. If you need to learn React Native for a job, you can use the same concepts and start learning that. If you need to learn something else, it's the same concepts that apply. And so Flutter's an amazing investment to make.
Definitely.
We have a special guest who has just joined us, and it's very exciting. He's been on our channel before, and it's always a pleasure to have him. Yes, I'm talking about, so if you have followed our series from before, our interview with someone from the Flutter team, and not just anyone, not just anyone, talking to someone from the Flutter team, the incredible Chris Sells.
Hey, Rohan, how are you?
I'm very fine. Very nice to see you.
And good to see you too. And you too, Randal. How are you been?
Been well. Been better now that Flutter 2 is out.
I hope that's true. I hope we are able to bring a little bit of joy to the world with Flutter 2.
And I presume you have a little bit more spare time again after the release.
You'd think so.
I would hope so.
I've started working on another upcoming event. You might have heard of Google I/O. So I don't actually have any more time. Hopefully, sometime later in the year, I'll be able to take a deep breath in and out.
Are you sleeping between midnight and 1? Maybe you can get that time back.
I know, right? So I can get a third of my day back without all that silly sleep.
Right. I think we're just going to continue on with taking whatever questions we have so far, unless you have something brief you want to say about the event for you and maybe some of the sequential stuff that's come over since then. Do you have anything to say about that?
I'm not sure what you mean by sequential stuff. That sounds interesting.
Stuff that happened since then.
Oh, you mean since last week?
Yes, this last week, right? Yes.
I don't have a lot of announcements to make since last week. We kind of gave you everything we had last week.
Okay.
I will say that it was an amazing experience, right? Being Flutter 2 was actually something we worked on for about a year, from conception to delivery, and it was amazing to watch not just the Google team, but the entire community come together for that release. As wonderful as the technology is for Flutter, even my favorite part of Flutter is the community and the ecosystem all up. So it was pretty great to be able to deliver that event and the new updated version of Flutter last week.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, for me, it's I've had my clients started to ask a little bit more about Flutter, which is a good sign.
Cool.
I mean, the number 2 is just magical. It's not you could have called this, 1.19 or whatever the next number would be. But I see by making it 2, you made it a serious event, and because of the addition also of more stable web and more stable desktop. But I have clients now that believe this is a major shift in the output, and I wouldn't blame them. I remember when I was writing the first Perl book that I had clients that would tell me, I can't use Perl yet because it's just something you download, but the book gave it legitimacy, even though it seems crazy to me. But their bosses were looking for some sign that Perl wasn't going away and it's going to keep moving forward. And so just the existence of the book was enough to get them to start using Perl in their companies. And I see this Flutter 2 being roughly the same sort of event at about the same time frame, actually, in the existence of both Perl and Flutter. It was about this length of time in. So I see great things for that, given how much Perl code's still out there running everything that you do. This is great. This is really wonderful. So do we have any questions, or are we still looking for people to type things? Do we have another one in there? Let's see. I see a lot of comments flying by. I can't keep track of everything. Oh, here we go. Chris, of course, can you take that? Or I should read it first, right? No.
Sure.
You can read it. Okay, I'll read it. Okay. Oh, so I could mangle the name, right? Feel Sixto Cabral, something like that, asks a really interesting question. Did Toyota select Flutter because it gives better security? That's an interesting question. Chris, I'll let you take that.
That's an interesting question. The Toyota team came to us a number of months ago, having already done extensive prototyping with Flutter. And when it comes to running Flutter on a car, it's not just, hey, can I write the kind of app that I want, right? But it's hey, can I run Flutter on this, on this version of embedded Linux that I've chosen? Can I build the Flutter engine to run on that version of Linux? They happen to choose. Actually, years ago, they chose automotive grade Linux for all kinds of characteristics. I assume security and footprint and efficiency were all among those. I do know from a security point of view that I have volunteered my garage to the Flutter engineers as an extended test lab for running Flutter apps on my car. Well, I assume I will be buying as soon as I can run Flutter apps on my car. Of course, I have to have one of those. But they've already told me that even I won't be able to run Flutter apps on my own car. It will be too locked down, too secure. Even sideload my own apps, which is somewhat sad. But I assume it was less about picking Flutter for those kinds of reasons and more about picking the underlying operating system, AGL. But I do know that they picked it for responsiveness and the fact that it generated native code, and it had an extensive touch input support already built in, and it had a small footprint so that it could run in an embedded environment. Those are all the kinds of technical considerations they had to make when they're picking a UI framework to run on your car, right?
Cool. Well, we're still taking your questions. Please just type them in the chat space. Don't need to hashtag them. Pretty much everybody that's there is a fair game for now. And we do have another question. Here we go. So from Dalton Light. Oh, same guy that did our very first question. Is there a Flutter roadmap where we can see some of the features that might be coming soon, or is most of it still under wraps?
Well, it is interesting. Flutter itself is an open source project. We find it very difficult to kind of keep things secret because of that. We want to make sure that there's news, that it's worth people turning into an event like Flutter Engage or Google I/O. So we do some tricks As one example, we waited to the last possible moment, like Wednesday morning, to flip from 1.x to 2.0 in our version number scheme.
Yep, I saw that.
But on the other hand, we had our own private fork internally, and we did that to test it and make sure it worked, and we did all that. But most of the work we do is in the public's eye. So if you keep an eye on the not just the Flutter repo, but on the plugins repos and the tooling repos, and there's more than 30 at last count, I think. Flutter repos.
You left out the Dart repo.
And of course Dart, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I'm crazy. I have a download. I have a clone of both the Dart SDK, and of course you automatically get that in Flutter, so that's real easy to have a repo of it.
Totally.
Yeah. And I believe I saw something that had like the sort of short-term milestones and the things you were going to build in each of those as part of the public side of the repo.
So if you go to the Flutter wiki, which is associated with the repository, we have our current roadmap on there. Although you've already seen us do a bunch of those things, bringing all three of the desktop platforms to beta, bringing web to stable, bringing null safety to stable, right? Those are the things that we've been working hard on for a number of months. Of course, we have some other exciting stuff to share, at the next event. But yeah, that we always try to put as much detail as we can into the roadmap. Honestly, it's less in that case. It's less about us being secretive, and much more about being careful not to overcommit. Right? There's a lot of moving pieces in Flutter, and there's a lot of contributors. In fact, most of the contributors aren't on the Flutter team inside of Google. They're on the greater Flutter team. And so, we try to coordinate all of that into meaningful releases with additional features at every stable release that we're confident are stable, right? That we're ready to make it into people's apps.
That's perfect. There's some great questions coming from the audience, and kind of want to segue into last Tuesday's event. So one of the big announcements was Flutter Web going into the stable branch. And this question arises is that, what were some of the big checkboxes that, the Flutter team ticked? Or what was some significant task that was completed that made the Flutter team convinced that I think it's time for taking it to the stable branch?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Flutter for Web started like all these kinds of projects as a prototype, right? Could we do this? And this happened, a couple of years ago, where we were seeing, could this even happen? Could we take Flutter code and produce a working web app? And the web platform is different than any of our other platforms, right? All of the rest of our platforms gets to share a renderer, which is, the drawing code that lives on top of Skia, that ships in a portable binary. Whereas with our initial prototype of Flutter for Web, we rendered as HTML, right? A combination of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And it's hard. I mean, the semantics aren't the same, right? I mean, in that case, we don't own every pixel, right? We're generating HTML. And so because the semantics aren't the same, and the controls or the underlying widgets aren't the same, we don't quite have the fidelity that we want, and we don't quite have the performance that we want. It's better for browsers that run, we know from experience, it's better for browsers that run on mobile platforms for us to generate HTML and CSS and JavaScript. But we know for desktop platforms, the best way for us to get the performance and fidelity that we want was to build a whole new renderer on top of something called Canvas Kit. And Canvas Kit is essentially Skia that has been implemented to draw on an HTML canvas element. And that gives us back control of all the pixels, and we have 100% fidelity. However, what that means then is we had to implement all of these crazy gradients and drawing and scrolling and all of this stuff. We have been building up the renderer that we share across all the other 5 platforms for years, 4, 5, 6 years. Whereas the Flutter Web renderer is something that we've been bringing up to speed over the last 2 or 3 years to get this to a place where we consider it stable enough for people to really use in their production apps, and where we were happy with the performance. And so really the last piece that clicked into place that made us feel ready to bring Flutter Web into the stable channel was when we made the architectural change that we could, when you actually build a Flutter Web app, it actually builds both code for the HTML renderer and the CanvasKit renderer, so that when somebody accesses your web on the desktop, they get CanvasKit, and when they access it from a mobile browser, then they get HTML. And that gives, we think, the best mix of fidelity and performance for both platforms. And that's when we really thought, okay, we're ready. We can bring this to the stable channel now.
This is really exciting. We got a sneak peek into the behind the scenes of it. It was pretty exciting. I noticed that you mentioned how HTML and all the associated files are generated. Now, traditionally for web development, it is the developers make the HTML tags, and all frameworks they kind of make this pipeline more efficient. But the developers place the tags, HTML tags, and that's how the website is made. But Flutter Web takes this unique approach where we write code in Dart, and the HTML is generated for us. So with this unique approach, since now Flutter Web is in stable, many people will want to use this. So what would be some of the differences for people who are want to transition from laying out HTML tags to doing this different way where you write code in Dart and it gets generated? What's some things that they might want to know before they get into using Flutter Web as their primary web development platform?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. There's a lot in common conceptually between HTML and the way you do Flutter, but practically every detail is different, right? Conceptually, HTML and Flutter are both declarative, right? You say, hey, I want, in HTML, you can say, oh, I want a form, and then I want a button, and then I want a field, and, I want a text area, and you compose everything in a declarative way. And then you provide, some things like width and height, and you set styles and colors and fonts, and you tell the browser, hey, these are the characteristics I want of my UI. But you rarely say, oh, I want it at this pixel location or that pixel location, or, instead you let the browser kind of lay everything out, and it does its interpretation. And in that way, it's declarative, right? Because you're not drawing every frame, right? Instead, you're saying, here's the things that I want, and let the browser do the rendering. And it's composable in the sense that you build up new kinds of HTML UI experiences by bundling, smaller, more primitive experiences together, right? That's kind of how you do things in HTML. And then you use, styles and CSS to set, colors and fonts and padding and such like. So conceptually, Flutter is identical to that, except the actual code you type is 100% different. Right?
Yeah. Great answer there. I had I actually have two questions that answer inspired. So let's do the one here. First one would be, people have asked me over the last 6 months, what's the difference between Flutter for the web and what I've already built with Angular Dart? And
that's a good question. Yes.
If you want to answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Angular Dart is, I was an Angular 1.0 Angular JS programmer years and years ago. I enjoyed it quite a bit. But essentially, Angular Dart is I want the static compilation step that comes with Dart to check my code, right? So that I can check my code at compile time as opposed to waiting for users to find my errors at runtime. But I want to have a traditional HTML element and reuse all my CSS and that's what Angular Dart is, right? It's essentially HTML plus CSS plus Dart instead of JavaScript. That's Angular Dart. And of course, we use it extensively inside of Google. Flutter for Web is Flutter, just like you would write for Android or iOS or Windows or Mac or Linux. It's Flutter code that would run anywhere, except we make it run on the web, right? So there's no there are, of course, HTML tags, and there is JavaScript, and I'm sure there is CSS in there as well, but you don't write any of that, right? What you do is you write Flutter code, and then we take care of, you're targeting the web, we'll output the appropriate code. You're targeting, Windows, we'll output the appropriate code, etc. We don't implement Flutter Web on top of Angular. We implement it, we either generate HTML directly, depending if we're using HTML renderer, or we generate it in terms of Canvas Kit, which is essentially Skia on top of Canvas.
Awesome. Sounds like we've got a question from the audience. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. Okay. Ray Waltz asks from our current audience, in the main Flutter Engage event, they, people like you, mentioned that the Flutter team, people like you, would be releasing a recommended architecture template in the next couple of months. Any idea what that will look like?
Yes, I do have some idea what that would look like. But instead of spoiling the surprise, what I will do is ask you to tune in at I/O. I'm hoping that it will be ready in that time frame. But what I can do is, the whole motivation for that was, the counter app was designed specifically. The thing you get when you do Flutter Create.
I know.
Was designed specifically to kind of teach you the core concepts of Dart and teach you the core concepts of Flutter.
Yeah.
In a very mobile app centric way. And it has been fantastic from that point of view, right? It has launched, 2 million Flutter developers that have tried Flutter in various ways over the years. That has been fantastic. That's where I learned the basics of Flutter and Dart from the counter app. But the problem with the counter app is it doesn't put you on a path, right? It kind of teaches you those concepts, and then you're kind of left on your own. Well, what do I do if I want to add a second page? What do I do if I want to have data that's not just bundled with my stateful widget? What do I do if I want to do all kinds of things, right? Where do I put stuff? Well, how do I structure my apps as it grows over time, or in a multi-user team environment? Mm-hmm. And so we're taking all of those things that we hear as requests from our users, or as many as we can, and we've kind of learned a lot of those answers, or at least we have some pretty good idea about a lot of those best practices that we've learned over the last 2-3 years of Flutter development, and we're putting those into a template so that people can get to those, right, and use them.
So that raises quickly 2 more questions to follow up on the templates. Will there be a minimal template that I don't have to keep deleting all the code from the counter app?
So that's interesting. We are hoping, we hear that, by the way, right? That people like templates. But the first thing they tend to do is throw away all the code we give them and start over, especially there's kind of two modes. I'm brand new.
Yep.
I don't quite know. And then there's the intermediate to advanced. I know what I'm doing. I don't want any of this code that the counter app gives me.
Yep.
And we want to, this new template, we're hoping to capture best practices and give you code that you would not throw away, right? That you would take and build on, right? That's our hope. Now, of course, a template can't be all things to all people, but that's our hope.
Yeah. I basically I have a sort of a blank template for my RiverPod based stuff that I built and put it into a VS Code snippet, which works really, really well. But it still means I got to see the stupid counter app. No, the great counter app. Sorry, the great counter app. And then I do select all, delete, and then I ran my little shortcut. That's kind of nice. So yeah, and also user enabled templates too. So a team can have a bunch of standard templates that they can use Flutter create and their template name.
Actually, I think what this is turning out into is the Randal Schwartz gives Chris a list of hoped for features in future versions of Flutter.
Well,
fantastic.
Right,
Keep it coming, Randal. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to solve the problems I see, not just from me, but all the people out there.
Absolutely.
But here's a question that's coming from, thank you. Here's a question that's coming from some various people in the chat channels over the last week. I can do hot reload on a web app when I'm using React Native. In other words, a reload that preserves state.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the same thing available in Flutter Web because it sure you can restart the whole thing, but you lose all your state. Is there a possibility of the technology to do that? And do you think would you know if anybody's working on it?
There certainly is a possibility, right? It's merely a matter of arranging the ones and zeros in the right order to make the thing happen. And it is, of course, on our roadmap, right? We know that people want to do that. We have we've hit right now a happy medium, which is you don't get stateful hot reload when it comes to your Flutter web apps, but you do stay on the same page, right? So when you do a reload, you lose the state, but you at least stay on the same page.
Yeah.
Which gets you kind of 80% there, right? Where that workflow where, you start up your app, you navigate to the page you want to work on, you start working on it, and then you get to see that, evolve over time. It would be really terrible if you had to start at the login page every time you made, a save to your file and have to navigate. So we've made it work there, which we find solves about 80% of the problem. But that other 20% is still on our list. And that's the hard part. But we're working on it.
And I do appreciate that thanks to the work on DDC, it's nice that you're not actually having to build the entire app for your hot restart. It's incremental based on the things that have changed. At least that's the way I understand it. Yeah.
And the way essentially there's an underlying protocol, right? A debug protocol that we implemented, and we essentially created a bridge between the Chrome debugging protocol and the Dart debugging protocol.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good, but not all the way done. And of course, there's just some concepts that the Dart debugging protocol that hasn't had to deal with, right? So we're still figuring out how to get what we need there.
Cool. Well, that sounds promising. I'm waiting for it eventually. I'm not waiting too long. I'm building stuff already. I'm building stuff. Yeah. That's what I do. I think we have another question from the audience. Dalton Light again. Well, he's busy. He's asking what he wants to ask. This is all great. During the keynote, they, like you guys, showcased the one AR game built using Flutter. I think this was near the end, the Wallace and Gromit thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is that something that you believe you will see more of in the future? Will there eventually be a Unity-like editor for Flutter?
So words like the future and eventually make me say absolutely yes. Before I die, we will see those features in Flutter. But I still think I've got another good 50 years in me, so I can make promises like that.
Nice.
Definitely, these are things that we're looking at. I mean, with augmented reality, these are the kinds of things you can do today, right? I mean, being able to use ML, TensorFlow Lite, right? Being able to do video processing in real time, being able to take that data and pump it into your Flutter UI. Obviously, these are things that can be done today because we've seen people do that. In terms of a Unity-like editor for Flutter, Flutter and Unity are built for very different things, right? Flutter is a framework and a library for building apps, and Unity is for building 3D games, and they're very different. I'd like to see us bring the two together so that you could use the right tool for the right job, but still bring the two together into a single app. That's kind of the thing I would like to see us do.
Rohan's got a question.
Oh yes, I noticed that you were talking about like templates, for people to get started. Now, one of the common things for people, when they get started or when they're new to Flutter is they might encounter errors, and that's where dev tools.
What? I never have any errors in my code. You don't either, Randal.
Well, I guess then it's just me. I guess a small component of people who are not good programmers as you. Well, we go into errors, and the people who are new, especially, they will encounter many errors, and they would use dev tools, to get this inspector pane as Chrome has for web development. I've noticed that in last week's Engage event, I felt that more emphasis was given rather not on debugging of the dev tools, so in the render tree and and all that, but rather on improving the performance. So there were a lot of examples on find the frame that's causing that's giving the slow performance, or see which image resource or which resource is taking the most space for very minimal use. So I just wanted to know is there what's behind the scenes vision of dev tools? Is it now trying to branch out more into this is a good working Flutter app, let's kind of make it better and more efficient? Is that the way the Flutter team envisions dev tools to go to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've really got two things we're doing with dev tools. One is making sure that developers that are new and make common errors like overflow errors, right, things like that, that we hold their hand and we say, hey, we noticed you made one of these, press this button, we'll help you track it all the way into the Flutter inspector, and we'll bring it into your IDE of choice, and we'll highlight it, and we'll make it as clear as we possibly can what the problem is and how you can fix it, as a way to do two things. One, get developers as productive as they can be when they're first getting up to speed in Flutter, but also two, kind of introducing them to this idea. There's this thing called dev tools, which has all this great stuff in it. And it's kind of a discovery tool, right? For folks who are new to Flutter that didn't even know dev tools existed. We get a lot of feature requests for things we've already done in dev tools, right? So part of our job is to raise awareness and let people know that those tools are around. That said, the other thing we're trying to do with dev tools is that we get more and more developers building larger and larger apps with more lines of code, and suddenly optimization becomes a big deal, right? A memory leak on a smaller, medium-sized app isn't probably a big deal, but on a large app that runs for a long amount of time, this becomes a real problem. And so we build things like finding resource usage that is out of whack with what you think it ought to be, for tracking down app size, for memory leaks, for performance, and where you're seeing drop frames, and all of those things are for more advanced Flutter apps, which is a mark of Randal. You brought this up, right? This idea of Flutter as it gets more mature, right? And it has a larger and larger number of developers building bigger and bigger apps. These are the kinds of tools we have to build for that whole class of developers, like, the more than 1 million lines of code for GPay, making sure they can track down their memory leaks and their resource utilization and their CPU usage to make sure that they have the smallest, tightest version of GPay that they can get, even though it's a big app, right? So we're doing more and more of those things because we have customers that demand it. They're building bigger and bigger apps.
And I think DevTools is a really undersung feature of your Flutter SDK, in the sense that it just keeps getting better. I mean, the last time I looked at Layout Explorer, it didn't have all these cool boxes and arrows, and you could move things around, and you could click and say, well, what if this was a Flex 3 instead of a Flex 2? It has so much new stuff now that can do so much. In fact, you can even run the debugger in the DevTool. You don't have to go back to your IDE. You know, if you go just one window. That was I'm sure that took some work. I'm sure somebody worked really, really hard to make that work. And that, to me, is amazing. So I'm going to try to come up with some more screencasts on that, because I think that's going to be important to have more people understand what can be done with DevTools. But I definitely agree. So thank you, team, for building that. I also love the UI library, and I kind of wish that would be published somewhere so we could use it independently for other projects. But
that's interesting, right? There are some great widgets in there, right? There's a component, there's a tree view, there's a tree grid in there, and actually, these are the kinds of things you need when you're building, desktop form factor Flutter apps, right? And so, as you know, the web obviously is both mobile and desktop form factors. All the desktop support is all desktop form factors. As we continue down this road of supporting a desktop form factor in a much better way than we had before, making sure we have the widgets that people need, either as part of the framework or as packages on PubDev. Is definitely part of that. And so we often talk about the bits and pieces that are in DevTools. And in fact, we have factored out one of them recently, which is the file selector plugin. And so you can now, we had some experimental version of that code in the old Flutter desktop embedding repository, but now we've refactored that into the official kind of plugins repository, and we're moving that towards production quality, and that's just one of several.
Yeah, I also want to comment on that, because you brought up desktop, that I don't think most people realize, even if they're not ultimately building a desktop app, that they should try it on desktop, if only to get a window that changes size, hot reload, and just generally faster than building for iOS or Android.
So it's interesting. We hear a lot of people. One of the chief reasons we put a snapshot of the beta on the stable channel for Flutter is we hear a lot of people that would like to use desktop, even if they're not writing desktop apps, because they like it as a kind of a Flutter simulator, right? The desktop target becomes a Flutter simulator, and you combine, like a Mac OS target or a Linux target or a Windows target with, I don't know if you've seen Alois Daniels' device preview.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
So you combine the two of them. You stick a couple of lines of code at the top that says "I want device preview," and then you get the Flutter simulator experience, because now you can say, "Oh, I want my OS, my simulated OS to be in light mode or dark mode. I want it to be in this language or that language. I want it to be at this location. I want it, I want the screen size to be, an iOS, 12 phone, or an iPad or a Nexus 5 or whatever." And the combination of desktop target and that device preview plugin provides a magical experience, right?
Exactly.
Without ever starting up an emulator or a simulator or anything else. It can just be running on the native device. It's a fantastic development tool.
Yeah, I've heard people can use Xcode to build apps for your iPhone, but I wouldn't know the slightest about how to use it. That's how much Flutter insulates me from having to even know any of that. And that is such a great thing, such a great thing. We have a question from the audience, I think, right? Oh, yeah. Lens Paul is asking for Chris. That would be you again. Out of curiosity, if you can share this, what kind of state management does the Flutter team use?
So that is an interesting question, because here's the fun fact.
Yeah.
The Flutter team itself, the Googlers, the Google employees that work on the Flutter team at Google, we don't build a lot of Flutter apps. Right? We're building the framework, right? Yeah. So of course we have our developer relations folks. They build sample apps, and they choose whatever state management suits their needs. Most of the time, that's provider.
Mm-hmm.
We worked explicitly with Remy to come up with a solution that was easier to use than inherited widget.
And it is. It definitely is that.
And as well as being, full featured and easy to get started, and it scales really well to even medium or large apps, if that's the kind of style you like.
Right.
So we tend to use provider. We tend to recommend, all other things being equal, that people start with provider.
Yeah.
Except for developer relations, we don't spend a lot of time writing Flutter apps on the Flutter team. We work with people who write apps. I myself, I'm evenings and weekends, I write Flutter code because I enjoy it, and I tend to use provider as well. But people use different things according to their preferences.
Yeah, it's scary to me a little bit that everybody seems to reach for block first. And I go, there's a lot of moving parts, and no matter how you code up something with block, and provider is much simpler than that.
The nice thing about block is it provides some structure to your code. It provides some opinion. Right. Here separation of concerns. And if you like the code you write in that style and your team, it works well for your team, and block is a fantastic way to go. And then there's the smaller part of block. I think it's called Qubit.
Qubit, yeah.
Which is slightly less opinionated, but still more opinionated than provider, that you can use if you want. As well as MobX is one of my personal favorites. That feels like that's the one that makes the most sense to me. And so if I want something more full featured, I'll reach for MobX. But hooks and Redux and all of those things have all been implemented in Flutter. And over time, what you'll find as you understand the principles, because it all boils down to the same principles.
Right.
Once you understand what the principles are, you can build your own state management without any trouble. And I often find myself doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that basically what state management is, it has two separate but related functions. One of them is get the data somewhere other than to your parent and child. Mm-hmm. So in other words, get it sideways out or more stable than the build tree.
Or 6 levels deep without having to pass it along each. Right.
But also the importance of having notify on value change. Yep. So that you can, if new values come along, everybody that's sort of interested in that gets their rebuild call. Mm-hmm. And that they're two separate but somewhat overlapping issues. And as soon as you understand that, you can look at things. My personal choice for that is Riverpod. I really like Riverpod, mm-hmm. and obviously Remy's heir apparent to provider. So keep working on this, Remy. Get it done. I want to see a 1.0 release soon. So it's been interesting, and the fact that Dart provides such low-level. Dart and Flutter provides this low-level access to the kinds of things that it would take to build a state manager from scratch, means you don't have to be opinionated about that. So you can be opinionated about it, but you don't have to take just the one that's off the shelf, like some other frameworks, which is really really interesting. So the winner will be the winner of whatever happens. Rohan, you had a question?
Yes. So you were talking about about provider package and a block and all these cool constructs for state management, and that kind of brings up this question: is all of this is done in Dart, and Dart is a rather new language. It came out in about 2011 or 2013 or so, and as compared with other more old languages like JavaScript that came about in 1995. So way out there, does Dart being a newer language, does it give some additional benefits on what Flutter wants to do? Like implement these great constructs like the provider package that can manage state across the entire app or across a small component, like such or similar complex scenarios. Does having Dart as the language of Flutter, does it help in any way?
Yeah. Yes. Dart helps Flutter in several ways, and in fact, I would make the argument that we couldn't really have Flutter as you know it today without Dart. So a couple of things that Dart provides that are very important. One is it has been optimized for client-side development in the sense that the language itself has that kind of set of features that come from modern C-based languages, right? It's got inheritance and polymorphism and generics and a good standard library of commonly used types, and it's got async and await, and it provides all of these expected features in a very easy to use way. And we continue to add new versions of these. Extension methods are relatively new. Obviously, null safety is brand new, right? The idea being here that the features that you need to be a productive front-end developer are right there at your fingertips. And that right away makes development in Flutter with Dart, just so much more pleasant than it would be in other languages. But the thing that is the most critical, and the reason that Dart was chosen, is it has this chameleon ability that we needed to give Flutter the best of both a highly productive development experience with hot reload, less than a second. By the time you turn your head to look at your app, your code's already been updated and is running the new version of your code. But also when you compile for release mode, you're getting native code, right? So the way Dart does this is, during development time, it's all JITted, right? And so I can take the delta as I make small changes and then just send it off, to the runtime and say, patching this code, patching that code. And it all just happens super, super fast. But these, I've got the ahead of time compiler that takes all my exact same code and gives me, small, tight, x86 code or ARM code or JavaScript code that we've been optimizing for a decade. When it comes to Angular Dart, we reuse the same, we use the same compiler there. So this is a feature that wasn't available, and to my knowledge is still not available in any language, that you have this ability to have the best of both development experience and native runtime development experience. And without Dart, we wouldn't have Flutter the way we think of it today.
Cool. Great answer. I have one sort of small follow-up to that. I just discovered Dart Z. And
Z. I don't think I know what Dart Z is.
It's not a question for you. I was just going to talk about it, but I'll explain why I bring it up. Dart Z implements an entire functional programming language equivalent to Scala in Dart. And to imagine that being done in a language that didn't have the flexibility to do that sort of thing. Really, really amazing. So now I have to go off and learn Scala. I learn FP in general, but it does mean you can program an entirely different paradigm, mix it in with your Dart code, and it'll all work great. Since Scala and Dart Z essentially create a functional programming language, it means you can work with, you don't have any more worries about identity because you can't mutate anything. It's all immutable objects and all the way up and down. Very, very cool. So if you're out there and want to have something else to completely ruin your weekend this weekend, go look at Dart Z. Especially if you're into FP, go check that out. I forgot what the other one is. Oh, probably a good time to bring our other co-hosts in so we can ask you even more questions that I don't have in my head. So who's introducing Faisal? Well, he's been on. He already been on. All right. So Faisal, you have questions for Chris? Uh-oh. Well, you're muted, I guess. So I can make up sounds for you if you want.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I didn't know I was supposed to ask questions. I just kind of showed up.
Yeah.
Cool. Great to meet you, Chris. I think we've run across each other many times at these Dart conferences.
Oh, totally.
Cool. So, I mean, I just looking at Dart Z. Looks very cool. Functional languages. I think the only functional language I've ever played with truly is OCaml at McMaster, but I haven't really done much with it, so I should totally check this out.
Cool. There are plenty of dysfunctional languages.
Yes, definitely. You know,
I had some experience with F# in the .NET world.
Oh.
Well, one thing you said, Chris, was that Flutter would not have been possible without Dart as a language, and you talked about how Dart brings a lot of client experience as you're building. Is there something very specific about Dart? Like, for example, could you have done Flutter with, say, Java, which Dart is very similar to?
Could we have done Flutter with Java? Sure. We could have done it with C or C++ or any pick your favorite language, right?
Okay.
But what you wouldn't have is the best of both. The JIT compiler, which Dart supports, that gives you hot reload, sub-second hot reload during development time, and the ahead of time compiler, so that there's no jitter at runtime at all, right? You get tight native code no matter what platform you're targeting.
I see.
Dart is unique there.
Cool. And one completely unrelated question is, I know when Flutter first came out, a lot of people kept asking me, will Flutter have a UI editor? And I think those questions have kind of stopped, whereas people are starting to see that, it's fairly easy to build UIs in code, and especially with Compose and stuff. But does Flutter internally have any plans to build a UI editor, or are you guys just sticking to UI as code?
So one of the things that we have optimized Dart for is this idea of UI as code, right? And in fact, we've even gone so far as to have modes in both Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ, where kind of in your build method, it shows you the hierarchy, this parent and then this child, and that has these children, and et cetera. With the idea that we focus on the code, which is very different from, HTML or Android or, these other environments where you tend to have the behavior and the code separate. And then what people do is they tend to try to cram as much of either of a language into the, UI layout, right? So they can do looping and blah, 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 or they try to, do code generation, UI generation in the language because they have all the language constructs. So we just said, no, we're not gonna do that. That said, there are designer tools. I mean, there is a need for designer style tools where you don't have to write any code at all, and you can lay out squares and rectangles and circles and call this one a button and have this one have a gradient and this color and that font and then say, hey, this is a list of things and here's some test data. And there are absolutely lots of scenarios, both designer and developer scenarios, where such a UI editor is a very desirable thing. And there are some things, right? The Adobe XD has a Flutter extension that will generate Flutter code for you. Supernova does the same thing, right? You load up a sketch file and annotate it, and out comes Flutter code. And there will always be a need for this kind of thing. The central tension we see there is it kind of a one-way generation, and then the developer takes it and runs with it, and then you kind of break the chain, or can it be live, right? That as it generates the code, and as you update the code, the designer now has new information, and this is a somewhat unsolved problem, but just because it's currently unsolved, we don't think it's unsolvable.
Right. No, definitely not unsolvable. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Right.
One observation that I've made is, I guess I started programming 1999 or 2000, and there wasn't a lot of UI tools. I guess the only UI builder was Visual Studio Code. Everything was just building UI and code, and then suddenly you had this rise of Dreamweaver and all these applications where you could drag and drop, and now you're going back to UI as code. So I wonder, in the next 4 or 5 years, this problem that's not solvable right now will probably be solved, and you'll probably have this two-way editor whether it's something that Google does or something that a third party does. I do think we will see it. I think it's just a matter of time. I think as platforms mature, you start solving the harder stuff on and on.
Well, and there's also a lot. There's a lot of click stops in between. Generate the code once and then walk away versus live. The ideal of bidirectional. There's all kinds of extensibility points where you could say, let me have some of my code generated, and then some of the code the developer provides. If I need to regenerate the code, I don't step on what the developer. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat.
Yeah, to be honest, if you look at Android development, if you do Android development now, aside from Compose, which is trying to copy this idea of Flutter's UI as code, I don't believe most Android developers are looking at the Android XML editor. They're looking at it as a very high-level framework, and then it's just jumping straight into the code and kind of living in that Java Kotlin world now. So it's interesting how everything's progressed.
Yeah, fundamentally, again, at that point, it boils down to opinion and preference, right? Do you want, Android, HTML? There's lots of these UI frameworks that are very clear. This is the UI that I'll lay out over here, and these are the styles, and then over here it's the behavior. And separations of concerns are a good thing. Absolutely. Dart has chosen to embrace the code to reduce the number of concepts, and has focused heavily on making a UI framework where it's really imperative, but it looks and feels declarative.
Right.
And conceptually, it's declarative. It's meant to be simpler and faster, and it is not as toolable, right? Because HTML is not fantastic from a tooling point of view, but it's better than raw code, as we've seen. And certainly, various XML formats. Microsoft has XAML, and Android is layout.xml, and these kinds of essentially machine readable only formats are great for tools, but not for people.
Not for people.
So the question is, where do you draw that line? And Dart has an opinion. Flutter has an opinion. And that's where we drew the line. And we find folks are, as you said, very productive.
Definitely.
Yes.
Got a couple questions just to keep this going, and we're almost out of time. So if you have a question, please get it in the chat real quick, because we're going to start wrapping up shortly. We'll keep being here for a little while if there are more questions. So that's going to be the game there. I don't know, Chris, how soon you need to leave, but whenever you want to leave, feel free to bow out when you want. But I have a couple things I want to say about that. First, if the answer is XML, you asked the wrong question.
I don't know. XML's okay. I think XML's abused, but XML's okay.
Yeah, it's not really meant for humans to edit. That's what I keep thinking. It never was intended for humans to edit. It was always attempted as to be some sort of universal data structuring thing to go from one process to another. But people have mistaken that. The other thing I want to say is I thank you, because you're talking about the relationship between Dart and Flutter. Thank you for the Flutter team asking for and receiving the elimination of the new keyword.
Sure.
That cleared up all of my code. It makes it so much easier. It's also a good litmus test for how old a document or a video is.
Yeah, that's true. If it still uses new, you can tell. I find that over time, Dart becomes better and better at removing more and more lines of code.
Yes.
I like that. Null safety removes a whole class of lines of code from my apps, which I love, right? And for the combination of brevity and clarity, and then letting the compiler do as much heavy. I'm fundamentally lazy, so the more work I can make the compiler do for me, the happier I am. So I like that about Dart. I like fewer lines of code over time.
Cool. Yeah, me too. If you're getting paid by the line, though, this is probably a bad thing.
Sure.
And that's where you start using generated code to just generate 10,000 lines of crap. That'd be easy enough. What did I say that out loud? Sorry. So it actually leads into my next question, which is, how good is sound null safety? Does it catch everything? Is there anything still left to solve that we'll be seeing in future releases?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sound null safety. So the Dart team has pulled off something that is nearly unprecedented in the programming language family, which is that it has added null safety in a way that is sound after the fact, right? I mean, it is Rohan has pointed out, a decade-old language. There's lots of Dart code in the world. We've added not only null safety, where the types are not nullable by default, but we've also done it in a way that if you compile your app and all of the packages that you depend on and the framework itself is null safe as well, then you get sound null safety, which is then the compiler can generate just a lot less code for you. And in fact, Bob did a great job at Engage showing the reduction in code, because no need to check null, right? It's just gone. And that's, so when you get to write less code, your code is more robust, the compiler is checking it for you, and then the generated code is smaller. That's just win-win, right? I mean, that's just goodness all the way around. And so that is an amazing feat that the Dart language team is able to pull off. And not just the Dart language team, but the analyzer team itself, because the analyzer team had to understand both null safe and null unsafe code and be able to still allow you to write both and provide all the language services for both, and provide the migration tool to help you go from one to the other. All of that work was amazing. Being able to just migrate your code for you from one to another, and not just throwing question marks at the end of all your types. That wouldn't have been very useful, right? But actually analyze your code and say, there's no null here. You don't need null, and we'll just make it that way.
I know during the conference, Bob also talked about meta programming as in the future for Dart. What is all that about?
Yeah, so that is fundamentally about, so we don't have reflection in the language. In earlier versions of the language, we had reflection. You could walk up to a type and get all the data and use that. Reflection turned out to be super handy as a way to say, oh, I've got some incoming data, JSON or XML or SQL table results or whatever, some incoming data, and I've got this this type in Dart, and I want to do the mapping. And Reflection was fantastic when it came to doing the mapping at runtime, which bloated the app size because you had all of the runtime type identification information in there, and made it slower because it was doing all the interpreting at runtime as opposed to compile time. And we took that out because we are optimizing for the smallest, fastest apps we possibly can. But that also left kind of a hole in the sense of there's lots of things that you have type definitions and you want to cross this type barrier, and you want to write algorithms to do it as opposed to writing all the boilerplate code yourself. And so the idea of the metaprogramming is that you can do the code generation as part of the compilation process. You can actually think of Lisp macros, right? Or Rust macros, the ability to be able to say, I know information about this type and that type, and I want to generate some code to go between them or whatever, right? I want to think of metaprogramming as reflection information at compile time.
Got it.
As opposed to at runtime.
Got it.
And also as opposed to the build time, which I think sort of falls somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, compile build time. Yeah.
I used to use Reflection a lot when I was doing Dart on the server side for JSON parsing and stuff, and it was sorely missed in Flutter. But that's very cool to hear.
I think we got a question from the audience, so let's pull that in. Maybe. There we go. So the name I mangled before, I'll mangle it a similar way now. Phil Sixto Cabral, something like that. Does null safety mean there won't be null pointer variables, null references in the native code too?
Yeah, so a good question. So to be clear, what null safety means is if I say string or int or foo as an instance variable, by default, I have to have a value in that variable. It will never be null. If I want it to be nullable, I have to use question mark and say, oh, this could be a string or null. This could be an int or null. This could be a foo or null. That's really what it is. And so, yes, the benefit there is if you don't use nullable types, the generated code, right, the assembly language code that we generate, does not need to check for null because we know that the language is sound, that if it's past the compilation step, the value can never be null, and therefore the generated code doesn't have to check for null.
Cool. All right. That's a great answer there. I do have a slight follow-up to that. It's not directly related to that, but I discovered the other day that there is, I think we spoke about extensions earlier, maybe not in this thing. Oh, it was mentioned in the chat. There is a extension that ships with the Dart SDK now. So it's using that feature to get access to some more features, which is really nice. I thought of extensions only as stuff you would use as a consumer of all this stuff, but it's actually in the SDK. It adds on error to a feature that's strongly typed, so you don't end up with type mismatches. Soundly typed, I should say. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing we can do. The more of this static checking we build, and the more of these features we build, the better code, the more errors we can catch, and the better code we can generate, which is the whole purpose of what we're doing.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I don't think we've got any more questions coming in from the audience. The audience has been wonderful about generating quite a few things. And so we're just chatting backstage about what we're doing. Okay, Rohan, take it away.
So, this is amazing. The audience asked amazing questions. And also, it was lovely to have Chris, Randal, Faisal, and also some other people who you may not have seen, Monty, and also great work from Nilay from the Flutter team to help us organize this, and Madhusha, as always, very active on this channel. So it's outstanding effort, and we hope you liked this event. And as for last week's event, I'm thoroughly confident that all of you must have loved that. At least all of us here in the room, we surely loved that event. So very nice to have you, Chris, on our session again. And thanks for all the work you've done on the Flutter team. And with that, have a great day, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks for having me.
Stay null safe.
Stay null safe. I like it.
Bye, guys. It's
Bye
been
all.
fun.
Bye-bye.